Pembrokeshire.
Noswaith and a very good evening to you. Croeso to the Pembrokeshire Hustings. My name is Tom of Pure West Radio and I'm joined this evening by my colleague from Planet.
Good evening, Noswaith. My name is Iwan Thomas. I'm the Chief Executive of Planet and pleased that we are here to support the Pembrokeshire Community Hustings.
Yes, thank you very much to the audience that we have here in the room and also to the representatives who are hoping to get your vote a week today at the general election when the polls open on Thursday, July the 4th. This is a very special edition of Pure Politics, a show that Pure West Radio has had on the radio for 3 years this summer with a vision to inform, educate and lift the veil on politics here in Pembrokeshire. And Iwan, this is the epitome of that, I suppose.
Yes, this is the first time we have a live audience. Can I hear from a live audience tonight with a big cheer? Yeah. They're only here for the free biscuits, it's fine.
They were good biscuits, though. We're also joined, we are flanked by your future Member of Parliament here in Pembrokeshire for the Mid and South Pembrokedshire seat. We're going to let them do their own introductions very shortly. However, there are some absences who have sent in some statements, Iwan.
Yes, we've got two absentees sadly this evening, Hannah Anderson from the Women's Equality Party and also then James Purchase from the Green Party, and we have a statement which we'll come to as part of the opening statements from the candidates, if that's okay.
No problem. The format for this evening, for those that are listening on smart speaker, on the PWR app and online, and for those streaming this on social media, is we are going to give the candidates 60 seconds to open their statements, and we have 5 prepared questions from you at home. Everyone in this audience and all the questions that are being asked came via purewestradio.com/pure politics. So thank you all for your engagement throughout the last fortnight to culminate in this. So I think, should we start off with some opening statements?
I think we should. And our first statement this evening, we will start with Stephen Crabb, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Planet and Pure West for organising this, and thanks to Pembrokeshire College for hosting us. So my name's Stephen Crabb. I grew up just up the hill from here in Portfield Avenue. I've always been incredibly grateful for everything I had in Pembrokeshire growing up, and I'm passionate about seeing Pembrokeshire remain a great place to raise a family, a great place to work, a great place to grow up. And I've had the amazing privilege of being elected 5 times to go to Parliament and represent my home constituency. I'm putting myself forward again at this election to be re-elected, albeit for the new Mid and South constituency. And my promise at this election is exactly the same as I've made on every single occasion that I've run for Parliament before, which is to be the hardest working MP that local people have ever had, to always do my very, very best for Pembrokeshire people, and to always put our county first. And that's the basis of which I'm standing again here now in 2024.
Thank you very much. Next, we will... by all means. Busi Sipakar, Independent.
Hi, thank you very much for having me along here, Pure West Radio and Planet. It's a real honour to be here. It's a real honour under our democratic process as an independent to put myself forward in a time where people are looking at a democracy, a new democracy, whereby there is choice and where choice is based around serving. There's a word I use, and I'll share it with you. I've used it on my social media platform, and that's having love for each other. And that's not often used in politics, but that love which exceeds anything else can be used to betterment the people. So my core is about love, having a heart for the community that I've had the privilege of being a resident for 15 years, and seeing the best for everyone in this community. These are dreams and these are hopes and these are aspirations that have been in our country for centuries, and sadly there is a sense that we aren't that much further from the time of the principles of John Wesley, where he looked at how every person in this country can contribute, can benefit, can thrive, and can feel that they're okay. We've still got a long way to go.
We're going to move on through the other opening statements.
Okay, before we come to our next candidate, I just have to put a disclaimer in. I work with Chris Thomas in Planed, but obviously that holds no sway on this particular discussion this evening. So our next speaker is Chris Thomas.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, a diolch Iwan, thank you very much for the opportunity and well done on arranging such a great evening so far. So I'm Chris Thomas, I'm the candidate for Plaid Cymru. I live near Crymych in North Pembrokeshire, fifth generation dairy farm, small dairy farm with a family, but it's been great to be part of a community here in Pembrokeshire, and that's really what I'm standing for, is activism and localism, that people in the community can do great stuff, that we can affect our economy and our society by working together. We have such a range of resources in Pembrokeshire, people and also our natural resources. So now is the time, really, isn't it, to actually grasp those natural resources, make the best for our county, and starting from grassroots upwards. So I've been chair of the Community Council in Crymych. I was then a cabinet member for the environment, Welsh language, public protection. So I've had a great opportunity to know how it works in Pembrokeshire, and I hope you give me a chance to take it even further. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Next up, we have Alistair Cameron, Liberal Democrat.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Noswaith fawr pawb, dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg ers chwech neu 7 mlynedd, ond esgwysodwch fi bydd yn siarad yn Saesneg heno. I've been learning Welsh for about 6-7 years, but if you'll excuse me, I'll speak in English tonight. Name's Alistair Cameron. I grew up in Begelly in South Pembrokeshire, then moved away for university and work opportunities, came back to Pembrokeshire. I've now been elected as a county councillor for Kilgetty and Begelly ward. As Liberal Democrats, we want to do a lot to provide better employment opportunities for this area of Pembrokeshire, particularly in floating offshore wind, which could provide enormous opportunities in Pembroke Dock to maintain these turbines and provide good skilled jobs for everybody. And another big offer that we want to talk about as Liberal Democrats is social care. And we have a big offer to provide the right sort of funding for that, which will also help us health service, and I know as a county councillor it's an enormous challenge for the county council at the moment. Diolch yn fawr.
Okay, thank you. We go to our next candidate, and that is Stuart Marchant for Reform UK.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm particularly pleased with the work that I've done over the last couple of weeks in getting out and meeting people within the constituency. It's been a real eye-opener listening to some of the concerns. I've lived in Carmarthen for 20 years. I had the pleasure of returning to my maternal family's home in 2004, and I've decided to stand at this election for Reform UK. I think that our best days lay ahead of us, and I think that this country needs change. Pembrokeshire is crying out for jobs, crying out for transport links, and it's got so many opportunities to speak of, that I feel that it needs a member of parliament that is going to shout and scream about it on a national level and draw attention to all of the failings in the constituency so that we can make the constituency better for the future of our children. So I'm very pleased to represent Reform UK, and I'm very pleased to be here this evening. Thank you.
Okay, and we now move to our final candidate for opening remarks, and that is Henry Tufnell for Welsh Labour.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for being all of you for being here this evening. It's great for Planed and Pure West for organising, and for Pembrokeshire College for hosting. My name is Henry Tufnell. In terms of my background, I live outside St David's. I was born in Cheltenham, and professionally I trained and practiced as a barrister, specialising in healthcare, public and employment law, before leaving the bar to work for a small grassroots trade union, helping cleaners campaign for better pay and working conditions. It was a real honour to be selected by local Labour Party members last year, and I've been out on the doorstep very regularly talking to residents and organisations and stakeholders. And it's tough out there. It really is. There's a cost of living crisis. We've had over a decade of lack of investment in our public services. There's a real lack of opportunities for young people. And next week we have a fantastic opportunity for change. We have an opportunity to turn the page, and I want Pembrokeshire to be at the forefront of that change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are nearly almost met with everyone. There is a notable absence in the Green Party who have supplied their own statement for us, which anyone's going to read out.
Yeah, I'll just read the statement which was supplied by James Purchase from the Green Party, and this reads: "The world is too small for party politics. The dire problems of the planet cannot be solved in isolation, either in terms of economy or the climate crisis. The Green Party is the only party to have tackling the climate crisis at its front and centre. Indeed, it was set up over 50 years ago to address the depletion of the natural world, and things have only got far worse in that time. The Pembrokeshire Green Party is part of the Green Party of England and Wales, which is part of the Euro Greens, which is part of the Global Greens, with all member countries having core values to address the climate crisis and social inequality. The Pembrokeshire Green Party have no paymasters and is pretty well skint. All we are looking for is 5% of the vote so we can keep our deposit of £500 and carry on speaking up for the caring people of Pembrokeshire and the wider world we share with the voiceless. We're small in the UK, but big in the world. Vote Green, real hope, real change."
Thank you very much. For those that are watching at home on social media, you are able to comment on this stream and we'll be able to keep an eye on what's going on. And we're also going to now hear from the first of our questions. We've just had the world reference there. This is the UK general election. However, we're here this evening to look at local issues pertaining to Pembrokeshire. And with that in mind, I'm going to invite the first question from the floor relating to rural communities and agriculture to be read by Andy Dixon.
Evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're a largely rural area. Farming is hugely important, yet the pressures on our farmers is at an all-time high. With the need to support sustainable food sources in the UK and being less reliant on imported products and miles for food, what do the candidates propose to do to support the industry here in Pembrokeshire, if you're voted in?
If I could invite Chris Thomas.
Thank you very much, Andy. Yes, a very important topic and close to my heart. And Plaid Cymru obviously has played its part in Wales in ensuring that funds are retained for family farms predominantly, because we believe that the role of family farms are so important, especially in West Wales, in holding society together in a rural area, that we have to back that. So more funding towards retaining those family farms and ensuring then that young people can get into agriculture. We would look at ways of actually taking in more farms to be county farms so that they are retained instead of being taken over to be large factory farms, as it were. We would look to have farms available for young people to have that first step on the road to farming. And then in the news, obviously, recently, the Sustainable Farming Scheme has come under pressure that it's not possibly fit for purpose, in that it would erode the profitability of a family farm. So I'm glad to say now that proposals have been delayed in Welsh Government, but we would want to encourage UK Government to really push up additional funding, come through the Barnett formula, to come through additional revenues by devolving the Crown Estate, and actually having more resources available in West Wales to invest into farming. And you know, I mentioned earlier I was on the cabinet, and Pembrokeshire County Council has got 45 county farms. And I remember when I was on the cabinet, I was saying, well, we should invest in solar and wind and renewables on these farms, because we can then share that benefit in the wider communities around those county farms. So I would really advocate, and Plaid Cymru reinforces that we've got to look after the family farm to then ensure that our rural society continues as it should do. Thank you.
Thank you. Welsh Labour, Henry Tuffnell.
So farming is in a very transitory moment. In it, we're moving from the Common Agricultural Policy, which is under the European Union, and we're moving to a system which prioritises environmental and as a public good. And so farming is very important to set out. Farming's devolved to the Welsh Government. So the policy made, it comes from the Welsh Government, from my colleagues in Welsh Labour. Hugh Ranker Davies is the responsible minister. And there's various issues that the farming community are grappling with. There's a big fluctuating in the commodity prices, so in terms of the price of wheat or any kind of raw materials that they produce. And we need to provide that support. And it's incredibly important that we do that. And so a really positive, good working relationship with the farming minister and Welsh Government is very important, so that Pembrokeshire farmers know that their voice is heard. And there's been, lots of protests outside the Senedd recently, and we're now in a much better place because we're having much more discussions. Hugh Ranker-Davies is very much listening to the farming community, putting their concerns forward. They've got concerns around TB, around NVZs, nitrate vulnerable zones, and then also around the sustainable farming scheme. So it's critical that relationship is secure. But the other thing to think about is trade deals, and that sits within the UK government. And we can't have a situation that we've had under this Conservative government where they sell farmers down the river with trade deals, whether that's with Australia, New Zealand, what's going on with respect to Japan. And we need to have sustainable food produced locally here in Pembrokeshire to sell that, to really champion that. And that's why I'm really pleased that the Labour Party has made a commitment in the public sector that 50% of public sector produce will be produced locally and sustainably. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Moving on then to the Liberal Democrats. Alistair, what would you do in terms of the Liberal Democrats to support the industry here in Pembrokeshire?
Okay, well, first of all, as has already been said, I think the Australian-New Zealand trade deals have been absolutely disastrous for the farming community. They're threatening to flood this country with cheap imports from abroad and damage our homegrown produce. And we need to renegotiate them. And I know we've been told that would be hard to do, but we certainly need to have a go at renegotiating them. And we need to ensure that any future trade deals that we negotiate are not on the same lines as them, because they've actually sold our farming community down the river. Sustainable funding scheme that has been mentioned by the Welsh Government, I mean, that showed a change in emphasis, as has been said earlier, really towards rewilding land and, trying to, recognising the public goods of land and, trying to preserve more nature. And I think that was good in intention, but I think it was just too prescriptive. I mean, the requirement for 10% of the land to be kept as woodland for every farm was just not sensible, really. You have to take account of the land you've got. And what we now need to do, I mean, I'm pleased, first of all, the Welsh Government have rowed back a bit on that and said they're going to consult. But we now need to work very closely with our farmers and come up with a scheme that is acceptable and ensures that we can continue with farming in Wales, because we have a real risk of really wiping out a lot of it. And the farmers are at the end of the forefront in tackling our climate crisis. They know the land, they know what to do. We need to listen to what they say and work with them. And I mean, there are other concerns that have been mentioned. And we all went to an NFU Cymru meeting last week, and you could see the toll it was happening on farmers at the meeting, on their mental health. So we know this, that farmers in the country elsewhere have been attempted suicide. So we've got to work with the community and try and find a sensible way forward.
Okay, thank you, Alistair. We'll go now to our independent candidate and a view from Lucy. Can I come to you, please?
I'd like to continue from where Alistair finished off, because that's at my core, is the people, the farmers, the generations of families that have farmed for several years. And when I see, my passion is youth, and seeing young farmers coming up, and what hope have they got? What aspiration are we supporting in terms of the long traditions that they have? And the mental health is the big thing that has to be considered. We're not looking after our farmers, clearly, if they're having those stresses. We have to fully support them to be able to do the job and to trust them. That's the other issue. They are the experts, but there is too much interference, but there needs to be a working together in partnership, but farmers leading the way. Some of the expectations that we all have that we need in terms of climate change and more sustainable and greener farming, farmers will need the support to be able to make the changes that the planet requires. They can't do it alone. And I just have that sense from people that I've turned to and spoken to in the farming community that we've still got a long way to go supporting them. They're not getting fair prices, and it's just that sense of poverty amongst farmers. It's wrong. It's wrong. And as a government and as an advocate, as an independent, it is about fighting for the rights for farmers to exist, doing what they do, not to be focusing on what they have to do out of no choice in terms of diversification, which is then having a threat on our food security because we're not supporting them financially to do what they know best, which is to farm. Please, we must stop the current practice of, and this is a quote from a farmer, a close farmer friend, we are dismantling our farmland hectare by hectare. And when that farmland goes, in many cases, we see around our landscape here in Mid and South Pembrokedshire, it will never return.
Thank you, Bruce. Next, we'd like to hear from Reform UK.
Thank you very much. I also have been very shocked by the sentiments of farmers that I've come across in recent weeks. I've spent a lot of time with cattle farmers, but also arable farmers. They're concerned about many issues. One of their biggest concerns is the lack of young people that want to get into farming and the future of farmers being there to create food for us. Now, Reform UK have a very clear direction for UK farming, and that's through growth and genuine business development. We want to increase the farming budget for the UK to £3 billion, which is a considerable increase to the current levels and certainly one of the highest proposals from any party in this election. Obviously, it's a devolved matter within Wales, so the Senedd would decide how that money was spent. If I was so fortunate as to be successful and become your MP, then I intend to really vocally speak on a national level about any issues that I find in the constituency that are a result of the Senedd. If the Senedd is failing us and causing issues, that needs to be voiced on a national level so that everybody is aware of it. I think farming is essential for us. The other aspect that farmers have told me that they struggle with is with regards to pricing and supermarkets pricing, particularly around milk. Reform UK are going to instruct the Competitions and Markets Authority to actually get involved in that and ensure that a fair price is set for dairy products and end the monopoly that they seem to have. Public bodies would have to buy 75% of their food from British farms, and we'd be targeting that British production of food was supplying 70% of the food eaten in Britain. So for us, farms are for food. We do not think that trees should be getting planted on them with flowers. We think we need to be working with our farmers and letting them supply food for us to eat. I think it's very important for the people of Pembrokeshire. It's very important to me. Thank you.
And finally, Stephen Crabb, Conservatives.
Thank you very much. Let me just inject a bit of corrective into this because there's been quite a downbeat discussion about Pembrokeshire agriculture. Actually, agriculture remains a really strong and important part of our local economy. There are some great local farmers, great local farming families. I would invite any of these candidates to come to the Pembrokeshire Agricultural Show in August and see the strength and vibrancy of our local farming community. Now, none of that is to downplay some of the serious challenges they face, and that some of the other candidates already touched on those, but I would suggest that perhaps a couple of the most important and urgent of these challenges is the Welsh Government policy of wanting to remove 10% of productive agricultural land and put that into tree planting. And no, the Welsh Government haven't U-turned on that. Ahead of the election, they announced that they were going to pause it for a year. So there's a lot of work to be done if that policy is going to be changed. The second big challenge that comes up time and time again when you speak to Pembrokeshire farmers is the utter wreckage caused by the crisis of bovine TB. And if you ever sit with a farming family who've lost their herd and seen the emotions that go through that family when they've lost their entire livelihood, it really is something to behold. And I'm sorry, I don't wish to be too party political, mind you, it's a Hustings, but Welsh Government, I'm afraid, have ignored this crisis time and time again and haven't taken the steps they really need to grip it. It's a very complicated challenge, but if they could make some better progress on this, that would help sustain our local agricultural community, which remains the backbone of the local economy and sustains all of these wonderful villages that we've been all going around over the last 5 weeks knocking on doors.
Thank you very much. I'm interested to know if we have anyone within the agricultural sector here in the audience with us tonight, or if there's anyone live streaming this, so if I have any thoughts on any of the answers that we have. And to talk of those, the downplaying and some of the statements that have been made by one or two representatives, if you are in the agricultural sector and finding times and pressure hard, there are charities available, and one springs to mind, the DPJ Foundation, which is made for you if you do find yourself in times of need. Any questions from the floor before we move on to question 2? No?
Everyone's being very polite so far. I'm sure it'll heat up as we get on through the rest of the evening, but we will now move on to the second question, which, as Tom indicated, was selected from a ballot of questions as supplied by members of our audience here this evening. So the second question concerns social care, and it comes from the Reverend Neil Hook. So over to you, please.
As someone who visits the elderly and vulnerable in our communities on a regular basis, and has witnessed firsthand the consequence of generational underfunding in this vital sector, how would the candidates seek to address the crisis in social care here in Pembrokeshire?
We will start with Welsh Liberal Democrats, Alistair.
Yes, thank you. Well, mentioned earlier, I'm a county councillor, and this is the biggest challenge that we're facing financially on the council at the moment, how to pay for social care. And of course, it's not just about finances, it's about treating people with dignity at that stage in their lives. And we are really struggling to deal with it at the moment. And obviously, Pembrokeshire is a county where there's a lot of elderly people. It's an ageing county, and we've somehow got to deal with it. And I think it's beyond the county council. It really needs the Welsh Government, but even more than the Welsh Government, the UK Government, to come in and provide the necessary support. So we've got a big offer in the Liberal Democrats to try and deal with this. And we're presenting a package of measures which would include free care, boosting the wage for carers by £2 an hour, because it's so difficult to recruit carers at the moment, giving them also a decent career path so they've got progression, just like you can see in the health service, and also increasing the carers allowance by £20 a week, and providing improved respite care to enable the families, the people who are caring for others, to have a break from it all, which is absolutely what they need. And that's the offer we've got. Now that doesn't come, that comes at a big cost, obviously. We need to provide the finance for that. So to give you overall figures, but there will be about £8.3 billion in the UK for support for the NHS and social care, and another £1.4 billion for unpaid carers. And we've identified where the money will come from that, mainly through reversing tax cuts, which have recently been given to banks, amounting of about £4 billion. Now, obviously, the UK Government can set that. It's then we then, through the Barnett formula, an amount goes over to the Welsh Government, and it's up to the Welsh Government to implement that. But it is such a big crisis. I also think we're going to have to look at the long-term funding of social care as well, which all governments have ignored, and find a better way of financing, perhaps by, and this is my personal view, perhaps by people who are in work, having to pay a bit more money to put towards their social care for when they actually need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Lucy Sipica, Independent.
Thank you very much for that question. A question that's close to my heart, as I am a carer for my mother, and have been through every step of the crisis, as you put it, from transition from the health and the NHS into the social care setting. And both areas, health and social care, are on their knees, quite frankly. And a radical approach needs to be made. But that radical approach is about the priority. Do we prioritise on our elderly? Our elderly who are currently in a good position, who are able and are doing okay, still have huge fear. They have fear about what is to come for them as they get older, and as naturally for all of us, health deteriorates. So for those that are in that position already, that there is the dignity is we're battling to ensure that there's dignity, and it's just on the wing and the prayer at the moment. So we do need to work as advocates here as MPs to make sure that we do put that funding in place, that it is a priority, that we're not ripping the guts out of services within our communities here in Mid and South Pembrokedshire that would provide vital support for the elderly in social care, that will stave that deterioration of the health, that once it comes, it's rapid. And in many cases for elderly people, there is no turning back. But we can prevent that by putting in the things in place, or rather putting back the things and more of what has been taken away over the years. So it's a priority for all of us. We have to fight tooth and nail. Whoever our wonderful constituency here is going to choose amongst us to be your representative, we have got no choice but to fight tooth and nail for our elderly and give them back their dignity. Thank you very much.
Next, we're going to hear from Henry Tufnell, Welsh Labour Party.
Social care is one of the biggest challenges that we face, and it feeds right the way through the system. So with the beds in hospital wards, for instance, you have not being able to get the care packages in place. So that means you have individuals staying in hospital. The cost of the NHS is ongoing and is large. And then on top of that, you have ambulances waiting outside hospitals, unable to get the patients into the bed because there's no beds available, because the social care packages aren't in place and you can't discharge from hospital. So there's huge challenges that we face. And a big problem is in terms of recognising the skills that are required to be a carer. So having that and valuing that work as well. So providing the proper pay for social care. But taking a sort of a step back, the issue that we're facing in the Labour Party right across the board is financing. The Conservatives have paid fast and loose with public finances, and that's put us in a very, very difficult position in terms of having that economic responsibility. Wes Streeting has talked about moving towards a social care service and putting that on a national footing on level terms with the NHS. But that's something that we can't commit to in our manifesto, because we're struggling for where the money comes from because of what Liz Truss did, because of the way the Conservatives have handled the economy. And so the key thing is knowing that the Labour Party is committed to that. And the Welsh Government have already made progress in terms of the integration that happens between health and social care, with the wellbeing in terms of 2014 with the Wellbeing Act under Welsh Government. So there is progress, but we've got, on the doorstep, you hear it far too many times, the issues with social care and the strain it puts on families, and it's one of the greatest issues that we face.
Okay, thank you, Henry. I would like to remind everyone that you have an opportunity here in the audience to kind of respond and raise your views at the end as we go through the candidates' responses. So please, if there are things on this particular question, and I will remind you, which came from the Reverend Neil Hook here in Haverfordwest, who said, as someone who visits the elderly and vulnerable in our communities on a regular basis, he has witnessed firsthand, in his words, the consequence of generational underfunding in this vital sector, and he is asking how the candidates here seek to address this crisis in social care within Pembrokeshire. We'll now continue with the panel views, but I would like to hear from you in the audience as well. So I will now ask Welsh Conservatives and Stephen Crabb, please.
Thank you very much. So not to repeat everything that the other candidates have said, but this is an enormous challenge of our time. I think for us in Pembrokeshire, the challenge is writ very large indeed, because you see in places social care as a very threadbare service. You also see in Pembrokeshire an awful lot of loneliness. There's an awful lot of people who've retired to our county away from their own social support networks and their own family networks. And as they get older and less able, they find themselves more and more in need, but without that family support, which can help relieve some of the burden on social care. So for us in Pembrokeshire and rural areas of Wales, this is an enormous challenge. The heart of the question was around funding. I think it trivialises the importance of this issue to talk about, 3 months of Liz Truss being Prime Minister is what's stopping us reaching solutions. For decades, the main parties in London, but in Cardiff as well, have avoided doing what they need to do, which is to sit down and work out a cross-party agreement that's going to last 20, 30, 40 years and really bite the bullet. Theresa May tried to make an announcement about this during her Conservative election campaign of 2017 and almost blew up her government in the process, because Labour attacked it as a huge attack on pensioners. Until we can take the party politics out of this and actually have a really grown-up discussion, we're not going to make progress. And I'm afraid, sorry, if that's not an answer to your question, Neil, but that's the blunt truth.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. In terms of that question then, what would Reform UK do? Coming to you.
Thank you. I agree that the system needs serious reform. Like so many things in this country, it's disjointed. It's not working. It's not fit for purpose. Having a system that shares some responsibility with the NHS and some responsibility with the local authorities is bound to fail, and it will also create large differences within certain areas of our country. Under a Reform UK government, we would restructure the social care system so that it was a dedicated department with its own single source of funding. That funding would be achieved in a number of ways, partly through our tax reconciliation system or tax reform, which again is about clarifying and making things less bureaucratic. The bureaucracy in our tax system will result in a lot of savings, and so we feel that our benefits funding would certainly be able to throw additional money at social care, but it needs to be spent wisely. Borrowing additional money or just throwing money at a broken system is never going to work. It needs to be streamlined into a social care department that has a clear process of funding, and only Reform UK have included that in our contract with the people.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. And before we come to our final speaker, it's good to see that there is a lot of interaction going on online, and comments from Tina saying we should prioritise our people in terms of spending, and many other comments there, and thank you, please keep those coming. But to our final response on this particular question before we open it up to the floor, Chris Thomas, Plaid Cymru.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Yes, it's a very, very important, pertinent issue. We see level of elderly people increasing, and it's important to plan effectively. And Plaid Cymru have put forward through a manifesto, but also in consultation with the boards, health boards across Wales, a national care service provision that would bring together NHS, care services, local authority, to actually look at this a seamless transfer of undertaking between hospitals into care homes, because what we are seeing is that there isn't sufficient resource, there aren't sufficient workforce really in terms of enabling people then to move from that bed blocking situation into a care home. But we're very fortunate somewhat in Pembrokeshire that we are visionary in that we do have examples, community-led examples. We have the Clinview Care Farm in north of the county. Solva Care have done exceedingly well in developing ideas for elderly people to remain in their homes. So we have to embrace those, but the resource is not there. And within our plan for the National Care Service, Plaid Cymru have identified there is funding that we can go after, and the reform of the capital gains system, from what we've worked with economists to look at how that can be reformed. £12 billion can be drawn down through a reform there. A windfall tax on the energy companies, 12.8 billion. Increase the higher earning national insurance threshold, 12.5 billion. People earning over 10 million, a 1% increase there, 11 billion. The money is there, but we've got to be brave to go after changes in taxation so that money comes in and we care for our elderly people and ensure then that we invest and look at the best solution of reducing the bed blocking and giving a quality of life to people as they get older in Pembrokeshire.
Okay, diolch, Chris. Before we open it up to the floor, Chris has mentioned there, as other candidates, the challenges, but also that we have innovation within our communities here in Pembrokeshire, Clinview Care Farm, Solva Care, the Micro Enterprises Programme. But I would be interested to go back to the person who asked the question. Reverend Neil Hook, what is your kind of response to the candidates in terms of what their aspirations and ideas are in terms of how we look at supporting social care here in Pembrokeshire?
I'm delighted that all of the candidates have got something really positive to say in response to the fact that they all acknowledge that there is a crisis as well. All of the candidates have identified, and rightly so, that the biggest portion of the crisis in social care is around the elderly, but it's not the only part of the crisis in social care as well. And the question actually said the elderly and vulnerable as well. And we've got to make sure that the issue of social care isn't completely dominated by care for the elderly. It's rightly an important part of it, but there are also younger, disabled, handicapped, mentally challenged, psychiatric discharge patients in our county who still need integrated support as well.
Okay, thank you, Neil. I'm going to ask Alistair, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right, Neil. And I can again speak from the County Council's point of view. Actually, the biggest challenge in setting the budget for this year was children going into care. And these are highly vulnerable children. It actually virtually doubled, doubled this year. And unfortunately, we're not able to accommodate them within Pembrokeshire. So it's often elsewhere in Wales, or else even in England, in places like Birmingham, which is not a good way to treat people, to move them out of the county, but we haven't got the resources here. And I mean, I'll tell you this, the cost of this was sometimes like £1 million per person, which sounds like an enormous amount of money, but these are highly vulnerable people that need 24-hour care. We obviously, legally, we have to provide it, and morally as well. And this, I mean, the reasons for it, I suspect, is a bit of after COVID, the lockdown, all sorts of complex reasons. But it's something that the County Council is really trying to address at the moment. Thank you.
Picking up again, Neil mentioned in terms of it's not just elderly, it's also young people as well. Can I come to Vusi? You've obviously worked with young people in terms of education in Pembrokeshire. Any additional thoughts in terms of young people and social care that you think we should be tackling?
In terms of young people, and thank you, Neil, for highlighting that we needed to address that. And the key is young people who are vulnerable and who need support. So people that have learning disability. We were all, many of us were honoured to be at the Hustings on Tuesday, and I've been really honoured and privileged to have a really close bond with the group, Pembrokeshire People First, and quite frankly, the vulnerability that people with learning disability have is the fact that they are marginalised, and that government policy is totally overlooking what these very vulnerable people need, and they are providing the solutions. They are the leaders, and can very much do that in terms of directing and us taking the baton that they are presenting, in terms of a great charter that they presented, in terms of how we, again, it goes back to dignity, respect, and champion the fact that they have such a value in our community. So that's looking at the vulnerable folk, and that is extended to my experience within school children and the crisis of mental health amongst our school children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two questions from the floor. We'll go to the front row first, if that's okay. To the front row, the gentleman in the blazer.
If you could just raise your hand so we know where to come. Yeah. Thank you.
All I wanted to say is this is obviously of a very important subject. It's one of the most important subjects because it affects everyone in the country, everyone in this room, no matter what your age is. It's going to be a problem for everyone sooner or later. And although I'm hearing lots of individual ideas, I don't think any individual party has all the answers. And I just wish that on this particular subject, it would be nice if the main parties could all get together and actually decide exactly how this problem is going to be sorted out for the future. And once it's been decided, we can then, when it comes to elections, we can vote on whichever party we think has lived up to everything that's been decided and making the best job of it. But it's something that really does need, I think, consensus.
Thank you very much. We've got one more. There was a hand. There'll be the last one on this statement here on this slide, and then we're going to move on to the questions to keep to time. But please do keep your hands raised because there may be time at the end to go back to other thoughts. So please keep them in your mind.
Yeah. Can I just say that I was a little bit disappointed that only one of the candidates in front of us acknowledged that it's not the sole responsibility of the public sector to provide social care. You know, we have communities that can be mobilised. We have social enterprises that are proliferating. We have the private sector as well that is struggling, but nevertheless could be helped to be sustained. And, you know, the answer has to be, certainly if we want rapid solutions, is for that mixed care economy to be looked at and supported, which means not just that political parties need to get together to talk, but to actually enable those different sectors to work together to do something immediately with something that is in crisis.
Thank you very much. A complex issue which has got lots of many cogs to it, and we'll see what happens following next week. We're going to move on now to question 3. Fairly closely linked. We're looking at housing, and it's going to be Tracy Byman with the question.
My question is, do you recognise the issues with housing in the rural areas in Pembrokeshire? And what ideas do you have, other than just building new social housing? What else can be done?
What else can be done? We're going to start with Chris Thomas of Plaid Cymru.
Thank you for the question, Diolch yn fawr. Yes, of course, rural Pembrokeshire, we have challenges, housing, price, you know, being unaffordable. And Plaid Cymru would want to address the issue by ensuring that we develop a Bill of Rights, that everybody deserves a home, a first home. Some are fortunate to have a second home, but everybody deserves a first home, affordable. So we would look at the needs analysis. What we're seeing at the moment are developments in West Wales, in Pembrokeshire, or possibly several hundreds, 500 development outside Haverfordwest here. What is the need there? Has there been sufficient identification of what the community wants? And you know, I'm glad to say that Plaid Cymru have been developing pilot projects like the Dwyfor project in North Wales, looking at how local communities can actually look at buying up housing. There are initiatives such as Community Land Trust, Community Housing Trusts, where the actual local community works with a housing association, or possibly to actually build what's needed for young people and older people within that community. So giving it again, going back to the grassroots effect, but it is important that you have sufficient affordable housing for young people to live, to work, to raise their families, and have that continuation of society and communities within the Pembrokeshire. So yes, there are grants available to the Welsh Government, fortunately, housing grants, but there needs to be a far more radical approach to allow local people to take on parcels of land, because, you know, building provision within the LDP, the local development plan, is a challenge for communities to identify land for building. We need to make it more streamlined, allow local people to take charge of housing.
Thank you. We'll move on to Reform UK, Stuart.
Yeah, there certainly is a housing crisis. So I have the pleasure of renting out a handful of properties in and around Carmarthen, and they're affordable homes, and so my tenants are working people. I've really seen them struggling, and they can't move out because there's nowhere for them to go. We try to keep the rents as low as possible, so they're not motivated to change home very often. But frankly speaking, they would find it so hard if they wanted to. When a house is up for let now, there's a queue of people that want it. It's almost like a bidding war that can take place if the landlord is that way inclined. At Reform UK, we recognise that developers are not making full use of brownfield sites and currently unused buildings. In and around Pembrokeshire, there's a lot of buildings that aren't being used. We intend to reform the planning laws and to provide tax breaks for people to build on brownfield sites and to bring back into action previously very viable buildings. Haverfordwest, for example, huge number of buildings there that under our system of revised planning would be made available. We're also going to supply tax incentives for innovation within the building sectors. I've seen some proposals for modular designs and also printed buildings, so 3D printing. These lower the cost of builds quite dramatically. And so though building on a brownfield site or potentially refurbishing an unused building can be more costly than building on a greenfield site, with our reforms and our tax breaks, we would make it viable. And actually, we'd be protecting our countryside and allowing our farmers to continue to farm without even considering selling up for development. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Coming to the Welsh Conservative Party, Stephen Crabb, please.
Yeah, thank you. You started your question by saying, aside from building more homes, unfortunately, we do need to build more homes, and that would be a big start, and particularly if we were building the right-sized homes. For too long in places like Pembrokeshire, the house builders were carrying on building 3 and 4 bedroom properties where they get a nice profitable margin, and so they should. We weren't building anything like enough 1 or 2 bedroom starter homes, which is where the real need is in Pembrokeshire. So there's some correction that needs to happen there. But I think there's a range of things that could be looked at which are far more creative. Shared equity schemes, for example, recognizing that for a lot of younger families in particular, they're not going to have a big pot of money for a deposit. So something that helps them get some equity share of a property so they can build up something through the lifetime of while they live there, I think would be very useful. I am a believer in using in the local covenants, which used to be very popular if you go back several decades. And then people would buy a property with a covenant on, which would restrict it to being able to only sell it to local people, which would reduce the value of the property. And then the first thing they would do is write to their MP asking if they can help get the covenant lifted. But I actually do believe in covenants and actually protecting properties for genuinely local people. And the reason I say that is because I see some wonderful properties being built around Pembrokeshire, and I know all of the building firms, and they take great pride in their work, and a massive chunk of those new homes are being sold to people who are looking to retire here. And I'm all in favour of people coming to this beautiful part of the world, but what I'm really passionate about is keeping this place for young working families and making sure that we have a balance in our community. So we need to get a lot more creative. One big thing that Welsh Government could lead on is let's put together a register of all the empty properties in Wales. People reckon there's about 120,000 empty properties. About 10-15% of those are second homes, but the rest, 85%, are genuinely just empty dwellings. And there might be good reasons why they're empty. They might be very costly to bring them back into use. But actually, that would be a massive start. If you could bring 80, 90,000 dwellings back into the market, that would give you a really good start at tackling our homelessness and housing shortage crisis.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Again, just reminding the audience here in terms of Tracy's question, it was about, do the candidates recognise the issues with housing in the rural areas in Pembrokeshire particularly, and what ideas do you have as candidates other than just building new social housing? What else can be done? Alistair Cameron, what would the Liberal Democrats do in terms of looking at that issue?
Okay, well, first thing I want to say is actually in a previous life, I was a member of Cheltenham Borough Council and chair of the council's housing committee for about 4 years. So obviously dealt a lot with the issues there. The other thing to say is, I know this is talking about Pembrokeshire County Council, but one of the things you do get as a councillor, or I'm also as an MP in your casework, is you do get quite serious homeless problems where people have been waiting several years to try and get decent housing. So it is a serious problem for people. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, we need to use the planning system correctly. And that means when you do have a new development, you need to require some of those houses to be social, affordable, rented housing so people can live in them. And that's especially important in rural areas, in villages where people want to provide to live in a home in the village where they grew up in. You've got to be careful of this because sometimes developers come back to you and say, well, we can't afford them. And that's happened quite a few times on the council where we've been asked to relax the rules and allow them to go ahead without providing affordable housing. And really, as councillors, we need to stick to our guns and ensure that we do have the affordable housing. The council also does need to build houses as well. I mean, I know there are several schemes being worked at the moment, but we we do need to get a move on with them and achieve progress. And to do that, we also need both the Welsh Government and the UK Government provide the necessary finance so that we can borrow money to ensure that we can actually build, build the new houses. One final thing I want to mention as well, the County Council is currently working on a local development plan, and it is really the second one of them. It's really important that includes provision for affordable housing across all of the county, both the rural areas and the towns. That will be out to public consultation fairly soon. So I'd encourage everybody here to get involved in that and give us your views. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you. We'll move to Brucey Sipica, Independent.
Thank you. Can I just ask you to repeat the question in terms of just other than building more houses, what was the other issue that you wanted addressed?
Just to know if you had any other ideas what we could do other than housing. Personally, I own a plot of land. I was gifted a plot of land, but the village that I live in, we have to pay £27,500 to the council as a payment before I can build on my plot. And unfortunately, I'm disabled. I only work part-time. I can't afford that. I'm very, very lucky that I live with family. So I know I'm blessed in that department, and I'm not in any position that other people in the county are. But if other people had a plot, they had it there to build on, and they can't afford to build on it, what other ideas would you reduce that payment? How would you pay for the services then that those payments go to? That kind of thing. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, in terms of additional payments, thanks for clarifying that. And I'll be honest, I'm learning, and the whole process for me is about learning. I'm learning from all the candidates here. But just in response to that, it's about who has control. Let's be honest. It's the private sector building developers that have control, and they hold the power. Councils need to use the power that they have in terms of planning law to the benefit of people, so that it's accessible for people in terms of the example that you've raised with the obstacle that's put in your way in terms of affordability to just get the project off the ground. So restrictions do need to be lifted so that there's a pathway to be able to build. And affordability, as all the candidates have said, is the key. We can't be in a society where house prices are just rocketing up all the time, and so the affordability becomes just out of reach year on year for not just young people, but middle-aged folk, older folk. The crisis affects everyone, veterans, looking after homeless people. So it's having a connected plan that is fitting all the needs. As Stephen said, it's not just about the luxury homes and the big houses. We've got to be creative. And thanking the lady that spoke earlier about it's not just about central government, but everyone being involved. We have got good housing association here with ATEB. The council have got the potential to do stuff, but there are restrictions on them, or a lack of access to them being able to have a building programme. And we need to seek our councils, as well as housing and other private organisations, to build affordability. Thank you.
Thank you, Brucey. And lastly on this question, Welsh Labour, Henry Tufnell.
It is important to acknowledge that there is a housing crisis. High levels of homelessness, people, 5,000 are waiting on Pembrokeshire County Council for a council house, and there is an issue with affordability has already been raised by the other candidates, which impacts lots of our young people, that you feel you have to leave the county because you can't get a job that's going to pay well enough in order to afford your home. So there are a raft of issues that need addressing. Welsh Government have started to address some of these problems. So we have a second home council tax premium, and we also have an increase in the number of days in order to qualify for business rates to 182. So both of those are steps in the right direction. And there's also a pilot project going on in Gwynedd, where they're looking around reforming the planning. So in terms of getting planning permission for a change of use. So I think that's an interesting scheme that they're using there. So that's about redressing the balance, particularly in a community like Pembrokeshire, between the tourism industry and the local community, and trying to get that balance right. And I think if you go around to lots of community, Broadhaven's pretty bad, Little Haven's quite bad in terms of there are not that many people there all year round, and that's a problem that hollows out local communities, and so we need to redress that. From a sort of UK-wide perspective, it does really come down to the supply, though. I think that's the bottom line, is you need to build more social and affordable housing, and that will be put through planning laws, reforming the planning laws. That's a big thing that Keir Starmer's set out on a UK-wide level, and that working hand in hand with Welsh Government, we need to look at that. And I think it's really positive that the councillors are starting to think about building council homes again. That's huge, and that's one of the legacies that has really affected our society. And so I think there are schemes out there, and I think there is a real appetite from the political parties, and particularly the Labour Party, to try and get this right, to try and get that aspiration back, that people can do these things, they can afford their second home, they can have a roof over their head, that homelessness is not acceptable, and we need to do something about that. And so I'm really hopeful for the future that we can get that right.
Thank you very much. We've got 2 hands up, so we'll go to the gentleman in the pinkish shirt just here.
Oh, okay, sorry. We've had 3 questions so far on farming, health and housing. And most of what we've been talking about relates to Pembrokeshire, which is great. And we are obviously all very concerned about Pembrokeshire. But this is a national election. It's for the UK Parliament. And we must remember that when we send someone to Westminster, they are going to represent Pembrokeshire, and they're going to try and achieve the kind of things that we all seem to agree are problems. So let's focus on the fact that it's a national election, and let's ask Stephen, who's been our representative for, I think, 20 years, Stephen, yeah?
19, yeah.
Okay, nearly there. Could you tell me 5 things that, as our local representative, you think you have achieved for Pembrokeshire in that time?
I think that I would like to bypass that, because looking at things that have been achieved already, we're looking towards the future. And what I don't want to have at this room here is to have one candidate picked out of things that have happened when he's one member of a government with many seats in the House. So I do respect your question, but it's a time to have that conversation with him when he comes to your doorstep. What I'm looking at is, what can these individuals do when they have a seat in Parliament and they are there representing you as an individual as voted for by you. So I respect and appreciate your comment. However, I'm going to invite Stephen Crabb not to answer it on this occasion.
Well, it would be very difficult for him to answer. I presume that's part of the reason that we're not going to be...
Please, thank you. There was a point behind you, Katie.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. It's about council houses. If more council houses are built, could there be a guarantee that they're not sold like they were in the 80s?
I'm going to direct that to Henry Tufnell of Welsh Labour.
I mean, I totally agree with you that we need to have pride back in that, and that needs to be at the forefront of any government. That we can't revert to that, because that was effectively a political scheme by Thatcher that massively increased her voter base, because she had suddenly everyone buying into that sense of capital and sense of home ownership, and ultimately that's been at the expense of us as a wider society. And so I think what Pembrokeshire County Council is doing, increasing that housing supply, building more council houses, is a really step in the right direction. And I'm really, really pleased to be standing on a platform alongside Angela Rayner, who has been talking about the mission for her in government. Her mission is to build good quality council houses. And that is incredibly, incredibly important. And I'm really proud to be a part of that.
Obviously, this is generating a lot of interest online, and a couple of the kind of comments which are coming in online picks up on a point which was raised earlier in the discussion around absentee landlords in terms of then providing that housing, because we have a lot of vacant properties here in Pembrokeshire. Perhaps Stephen Crabb, can I come to you in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of how we deal with absentee landlords of properties which could be repurposed for those first-time buyers or local families?
So absentee landlord, that phrase covers a lot of different types of ownership. I actually have some sympathy for what Welsh Government and UK Government, both in the different ways, have been trying to do with shutting down some of the second home loopholes and stopping second homeowners from gaming the system, describing their home as a business on one day and another home on the other to avoid different tax charges. So I've got some sympathy with that. When it comes to absentee landlords, and you see this with the retail sector as well, with empty shops, it's the same principle applies. I think there are powers available to local authorities right now, and Chris Thomas, you could probably be in a position to correct me on this, but there are powers available to local authorities to require landlords, absent or otherwise, to keep their properties in a good state, to take steps to ensure that there's proper productive use of them. And I would like to see, the existing levers that are available being pulled as well to get these properties back into use. As I said in answer to the first question on this, if you could bring back a big portion of the stock of empty dwellings that there are in Wales, you could make great strides in terms of tackling homelessness. But alongside that, you are going to have to build new homes of the right size and actually protect a chunk of those homes for local people through covenants. That's what I believe.
Okay, again, thank you for that. Picking up, it was mentioned before, there's a conundrum in Pembrokeshire between local housing and the tourism sector and the value that that has in terms of jobs, skills and driving the local economy. Coming to you, Stuart, in terms of what would be your kind of take in terms of the balance between affordable local housing and the tourism sector?
Sure. Well, I think both are actually very important to Pembrokeshire. And actually, I've come across an awful lot of people that have got farms and they've actually diversified by creating, for example, a small holiday home that they can rent out and get an additional income for. Now, they are finding themselves affected with these penalties, and I don't think that's right. I think in situations where a person has a second home that's being used to generate tourists or to house tourists when they come to visit our county, I think that's something that we should be encouraging. I think when it comes to people that have got more than the one property on their farm, then I think that's something that needs to be looked at. But I think tourism is and should be very important to us in Pembrokeshire, and I think we should be encouraging them to come here. They provide a good source of income and they provide jobs for our younger people. So I think there's a balance to be had, but I think in many of the examples that I've come across, the second home tax, as it's referred to, is plainly wrong. It's people that have diversified. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, Jo online has got in touch. She works within mental health, sees firsthand the impact of homelessness. Some of the most vulnerable in society prioritised on the housing list, yet sleeping rough or sofa surfing, while others have second homes that for a large part of the year are empty. Tina, though, with a well said, I don't know for who that was, I assume it was Stuart. If you've just joined us, whether online on your smart speaker, PWR app, or on our social media platforms, we are hosting Community Hustings here for Pembrokeshire for the upcoming general election when the ballot and the polls open next week. We've already had questions about rural communities and agriculture, social care, and we've just had the housing question where it's just gone 8:10, and we have another question now relating to transport from Graham Devrow.
Good evening, panel. How can we improve the rail network between West Wales and the rest of the country to help support our communities and provide better access to jobs and services?
Thank you. We're going to start with Welsh Labour, Henry Tutnell.
Transport is a really big problem, public transport, and it holds us back in terms of our economy, and also, again, back to that opportunities, particularly for young people who are trying to access, in terms of access services, or also go out and enjoy the wider life in Pembrokeshire. We are Pembrokeshire People First, well, the majority of us were at Pembrokeshire People First Hustings, and people were arriving late to that hustings because they couldn't get the bus. on time. So it impacts us on a very, very real basis. And what the Labour Party has been looking to do, particularly in England, is when contracts expire, take it back into public ownership under Great British Railway. We've made strides in Wales already with Transport for Wales, but if you look at it, Great GWR, Great Western Railways, it stops at Carmarthen, doesn't come on down to Pembrokeshire. It's not good enough, quite frankly. It's not good enough because we need that in order to get our economy back on track here in Pembrokeshire, and we need better public transport. We've also committed to greater powers to the local authority to try and improve that bus provision as well. But again, when you've been in a situation in Westminster, when you've been hollowing out public services with a lack of investment, a lack of commitment, a long-term strategy, we are where we are today. And we need to reverse that trend. We need to have the change, and we need to look forward about how we can rejuvenate our economy, rejuvenate our society here in Pembrokeshire. And public transport has a key role to play within that. And I'm committed to working hand in hand with my colleagues in Welsh Government to try and make this back on the agenda, put Pembrokeshire at the forefront of that change.
Thank you. We'll move to Reform UK, Stuart Martin.
Transport in Pembrokeshire is really bad. It's not just the railways though, it's the roads as well. Whilst there's been some considerable improvements in the last decade or so, the roads are still a big problem. Now, Reform UK intends to scrap High Speed 2. High Speed 2 is a vanity project that only really benefits people that have already got very good transport links. Reform UK are going to reallocate the money that we would save from High Speed 2 to coastal areas. And so that's talking about Pembrokeshire. We have plans to provide improved roads and to improve the railway line. It should be electrified and it should be at a higher speed, not high speed trains, but it should be a decent speed railway link. The only way that we're going to keep young people in Pembrokeshire and keep the county truly alive is by giving them opportunities. That's opportunities that we've spoke about earlier by way of farming that I feel quite strongly about, but also opportunities to travel around the country and to go and work in places like Cardiff and London. Unfortunately, I think that where we are in the UK, we're forgotten about. But under a Reform UK government, you would not be forgotten about. And with me as your MP, I would be campaigning to get that railway line vastly improved. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the Welsh Conservative Party, Stephen Crabb.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a very good report written by me and the cross-party committee of MPs in the House of Commons on rail infrastructure in Wales. I think it was a very fair report. We were critical of UK government and critical of Welsh government. I had some very good ideas, which I don't propose to kind of go all the way through in answer to you, but that report is a good contribution, I think, to the debate about how we improve rail services. As other candidates said, it's not all about rail, but rail is an important part of the infrastructure. We are working very hard to try and get more of the first Great Western trains all the way through to Haverfordwest and Milford Haven, as they used to be in decades gone by. First Great Western say very strongly that with this new type of train, the track west of Carmarthen needs testing done on it to ensure that it can safely handle the loads. I'm not the technical expert on that, but that's where we are with that discussion. I work with Pembrokeshire County Council and Senedd members, a good team Pembrokeshire approach to try and get some improvements there. But for me, what I would love to see, and what I think would be a potential game changer for people living in Pembrokeshire and wanting to work further afield, is if you had an express service that got you to Cardiff in a commutable time. At the moment, 2 hours, was it 45 or something, is too long to commute in the morning and evening. If you look in England, people are commuting those kind of 100-mile distances to work, but with very fast train service. If we could get something like that, and it would mean running a service where you have to take out a lot of the stops, unfortunately, so it would have to go alongside the kind of social network that we have at the moment. But that would be a potential game changer for West Wales. None of this is very easy. Buses have a big role to play as well, and we can all say nice things about buses, but Welsh Government did recently cut financial support for buses, which is why we've seen a deterioration in bus services locally. But coming back to rail, if nationalisation was the answer to every question on these things, why is it when Welsh Government took over Transport for Wales, the performance absolutely deteriorated? This time last year, I had the Chief Executive of Transport for Wales in front of my committee, apologising profusely to us for how woeful the services have got in Wales. So there's a lot of work to be done, but a good rail service is part of our ambitions for economic development.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Obviously, then going to expand on that slightly, we talk about rail services, bus services as well. The Liberal Democrats have talked about a £2 cap on bus fares, but if there's no bus fares available, how is that actually going to, kind of work in Pembrokeshire? Your view, Alistair?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and deal with the cap at the end. I mean, just first of all, on the question, on the rail network, I mean, it's already been clarified that the rail services in Wales, are nationalised, they're state-owned, and therefore you do require public funding, public investment to make sure they're effective. I mean, my personal experience of the rail network has not been good, and I've been stranded in Carmarthen a few times. I'm sure many people here have as well. Wales lost out badly, unfortunately, with the funding for HS2, because that was considered to be a Wales scheme as well as an England scheme, and obviously it didn't run in Wales. So Wales lost out on money then that could have been invested in the network in Wales. Moving on to the bus services, I mean, this is an area with all the county councils' financial struggles at the moment, that it was a struggle to keep the support for the bus services going. Absolutely. You're probably aware a new contract was recently let for a bus company to take over a lot of the bus services, and we've had quite a few complaints about that. I have to say, I have personally had them when I've gone around canvassing, and that's something I'm taking up with the public transport people at the county council, and we need to make that work and ensure that the buses are reliable. You can get them at the right times. Absolutely vital that we keep our bus services going, though, because some villages rely on them. There are people in those villages who don't have access to car. We heard at the meeting with Pembrokeshire People's First earlier this week, people with disabilities who absolutely rely on them, elderly people. So all I can say from the county council's point of view is we must keep those services going, whatever the financial difficulties we face. And yeah, to answer your question on the cap, I mean, obviously, that was again looking at England, the policies for England. But I would like to see some cap on the fares in Wales, because obviously they are very expensive as well, and I would very much support that here in Wales. Thank you, John.
Okay. Thank you, Alistair. We heard earlier from one of our contributors about the innovation in communities within transport. Obviously, here in West Wales, we see schemes like Book a Bus and others in terms of trying to provide that access point where it doesn't exist at the moment. In terms of Plaid Cymru, Chris Thomas, what is the kind of plan that you would have in terms of supporting local transport solutions?
Yes, we need to be ambitious, most definitely, and look at joined-up approach of train services, linking to bus services, even linking to car services. We have the country car schemes. Also in Pembrokeshire, we have PACTO, Pembrokeshire Association of Community Transport. So we need to work with the communities and individuals. Look at this day and age we live in. We can call an Uber on our apps, but then, why can't we work together? If somebody is traveling alone, then surely there must be a way of having an app that we can share and say, well, look, does anybody want to share a lift in West Wales? So we've got to look at innovation and be bold, but at the same time in Wales, as opposed to Scotland and Northern Ireland, the rail infrastructure is not devolved. So Plaid Cymru is pushing that there would be that devolved control for Wales also, as is in Scotland. And we've heard people mentioning HS2. Well, lo and behold, everybody in this room pays taxes, probably, and we've contributed to HS2, where we're not having 1 inch of rail in Wales for that tax that we're providing. So we've got to address that issue. It's amounting to about £4 billion that we're losing out in Wales, according to the formula. So we have to fight for that money to come into Wales and invest in our infrastructure, transport infrastructure. But there are solutions out there. We've got to be bold, innovative, and link up the services for transport. And at the end of the day, we need to look at green solutions, don't we? We need to look at lowering carbon And there have been initiatives in Pembrokeshire even to look at hydrogen trains, hydrogen buses, so that we can then reduce that carbon footprint to ensure then that our travelling is sustainable and globally responsible. Diolch.
Thank you, Chris. Before I come to Vusi, again, thank you to everyone who's contributing online to the discussion. Mark Falzon has actually put a comment there, which I would like to kind of put towards Henry, if I may. He's asking if Labour do get elected with a majority in Westminster, will Wales get its share of HS2, do you think?
We haven't committed to that. First, because the scheme has ended. So it was the Conservative government that, well, Rishi Sunak, that stopped the scheme happening. And secondly, and I've raised this before, about the economic situation that we face. And we've been really clear about trying to have economic responsibility and having a fully costed, fully funded manifesto. And so we can't make that commitment around HS2.
Okay, thank you for that. Jonathan Boyd has been in touch to say he is really appreciating the answers, particularly on this transport issue, because it is so prevalent, obviously, to us here in Pembrokeshire. But Vusi, coming to you for your final comments on this particular topic of transport in terms of improving the rail network, but using that as a lever to support our communities to better access and jobs. Your thoughts, please.
Thank you for the question. And I like the way you phrase that, Tom, using it as a lever and a joined up approach. So yes, rail is important. Rail has very much been, as yourself with the question and the panel have amplified, is something that needs investment. So first of all, it is up to whoever of us is elected to fight to show that justifiably we need to have that cash investment from Westminster. We then, of course, when we put that fight and present on a case and receive something, we have to then be smart in the solutions. So present the case and have our solutions, and very much I'm on board with what the panel is saying in terms of course, with the railway, looking at the tracks, as Stephen said. So the infrastructure has to be in place. So that's a big project, but it's what we can do in the short and medium term. And very much it's about looking at the road networks, recognising that there has been improvement to date, and there is still work that's ongoing with from the time I moved down to Pembrokeshire 15 years ago. We've come a long way in the road network from here to Carmarthen. So it's then recognising that we are still a county of car users, and reflecting on what Chris has said, we do need to, as individuals and as communities, look at how we can change our habits if the provision is there. So putting on more buses is going to be a key, but we also have to play our part in reducing, when there is that availability of more public transport, our use of cars, certainly individually being used. There's still far too many of us, and myself included, that are using our cars on an individual basis. So what comes first? The provision, but also that kind of community responsibility and agreement that we would use and access the
Thank you very much, Lucy.
Network.
Thank you. Sorry. There you have, you've had answers there on transport. I'm curious to know what the floor has of any thoughts on this. And Chris Thomas mentioned about PACTO, one of our community agencies, going along with the conversation on the second row here about using community organisations. They currently have a survey looking at community transport needs as well. So if anyone watching or in the audience here wants to be involved and engage with that, you can find out more on the community hour on Sunday morning with Lee Hind from PAVS. Any thoughts on the answers given from the floor here in the audience? Yes.
Unless I'm wrong, all the issues that we've been thinking about so far are all devolved issues. And so what I really want to know is, how are any of the candidates in Westminster going to act in our interests, other than really fighting for more funding for Wales?
Okay, fair question. I can open that up. Henry Tuff, I'll come to you first.
So I think the relationship with Welsh Government, you're right that a lot of the issues we talked about are devolved, but the key is about having a positive working relationship with, and I've been developing that already. So with Eluned Morgan, for instance, who's the health minister, having a positive working relationship with her, looking, and we've been doing it in respect to the agricultural community as well. Hugh Ranker-Davis came up to Pembrokeshire recently. We had a round table with Pembrokeshire farmers, and I want to be a facilitator. I want to build a fully functioning working relationship with Welsh Government that acts in the interests of Pembrokeshire. And I want to be Pembrokeshire's voice in Cardiff as well as in London, because I think too often it becomes a political football that gets kicked back and forth between the two.
I'm going to offer Stephen Crabb the opportunity to respond to that question as well.
Thank you very much. I mean, if all it was about was having a good relationship between Welsh Government and UK Government, there'd be no reason to have gatherings like this to discuss these issues. I mean, we've had a time in Pembrokeshire when we had 2 Labour MPs, 2 Labour members of what was then called the Senedd, and we still struggled to get the attention that we deserve. We still struggled to get the investment. So don't buy the line that if you just vote for a Labour MP next Thursday, suddenly this relationship with Welsh Government will become magically smooth and suddenly Pembrokeshire will suddenly find itself being showered with investment. After the years of doing this job, what I've learned is it's incredibly hard to get good, focused attention from either government at Westminster or government in Cardiff on the needs of places like Pembrokeshire. And if you talk to parliamentary colleagues of mine in Cornwall or Cumbria of different parties, they would tell you the same things about their areas. It is very hard to get governments in Cardiff and Westminster focused on rural peripheral issues. That is the structural realities, the political realities of what we are discussing. What I have hopefully demonstrated over the time that I've been doing the job is I am very good at working cross-party, and I've done that with members of Welsh Government, individual Senedd members of different parties, and I do it week in, week out on a cross-party basis at Westminster with Labour and Plaid Cymru MPs. And I think more and more what is required is that kind of commonality, Team Wales approach, where HS2 is a good example. So I thought it was a poor decision by my party in the UK government not to recognise that it was essentially an English-only project. And the report that I authored contained a strong criticism of UK government. And what we're coming to, I think, is the punchline of this discussion is that what Pembrokeshire and any rural area, any community needs are elected politicians who aren't going to be cheerleaders for their party and pretend everything's rosy. It's people who are willing to stick their heads above the parapet, be critical on a fair basis, but ultimately be willing to work pragmatically and try and get things done.
Roger online, he posed the question, what are the candidates' thoughts on devolution? Make of what you will of those answers from the two and the others here. We're going to move on now.
Can we all chip in if you want on that one?
Sadly, no, we're pressed for time. The jazz box with Martin Oughton is going to start prompt at 9 o'clock, and I'm not one to get in the way of the jazz box. What I am going to do, though, is invite Jill Simpson to ask our 5th and final question today regarding environment.
If you were elected, how would you ensure that Pembrokeshire got funding for green energy projects that would provide job opportunities and help combat the climate emergency?
Thank you. We will start with Vusi Sipika from Independent.
So just to clarify your question, thank you very much for that. Green energy funding for projects, for green projects, is that right?
Green energy projects, yes, funding for them so that they actually pass. So how the Pembrokeshire got funding for green energy projects that would provide job opportunities, that the funding would come for those projects?
We would need to, or if I was elected, present via yourselves, and that's what I stand as an independent. It's working with the community. I really do take on board what Stephen is saying about cross-party working, and that's the key to moving forward. but working with yourselves, taking the ideas, taking the really good smart solutions that we can have, and putting that strong case to Westminster, particularly around our farming communities. The expectation upon them to have green solutions to farming is something that we as the politicians have to support and back with the finance. So that's one part aside in terms of agriculture and green industry. Also, just utilising what we have in our access, which we can see already, but just the stronger case for wind turbines and the generation of renewable energies. We've got a strong case and a strong position. We've got the offshore floating wind turbines, which sure is a long way ahead in terms of planning and implication, but utilising what is currently here. So at the moment, currently land-based wind turbines, 56%. We need to look to get the investment to up that to 70% and beyond. So there is that case, a strong case to get the money for more renewables. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll move to Chris Thomas, Plaid Cymru.
Great. Josh, I have a question. Thank you for the question. It's vitally important that we address this issue, environment, climate. But there are, again, opportunities. We have to look, innovative and opportunities. And one of the elements that Plaid Cymru wants to really address is the devolving of the Crown Estate in Wales. In that, we've heard of offshore wind generation now and floating wind, 50 gigawatt of generation off the coast and the Celtic Sea, but these floating wind platforms will be chained to the floor, seabed, and that is owned by the Crown Estate. So we're talking about a major increase in revenue for the Crown Estate, but in Scotland it's devolved. So what I'm and Plaid Cymru are proposing is that we really push for that increase, probably from 40 million pounds to 800 million pounds likely increase in revenue. So that becomes a fund for environmental improvements in Wales and investing in community energy so that local groups, we're fortunate up in North Pembrokeshire where I live, we put up a 700 kilowatt wind turbine and that can generate enough energy for 500 homes, and the revenue then is reinvested in the community. So let's use that sort of macro development of a 50 gigawatt development of the Celtic Sea to actually invest in addressing the issues of climate change and addressing environmental issues within Pembrokeshire, but also creating a wealth fund for Wales to actually regenerate funds within our community, within our society, within our economy, rather than it all going to Westminster.
And next we'll look to Reform UK, Stuart Marchant.
Thank you. The subsidies that go towards windmills and net zero really are adding to the debts of our children. And we are very concerned about that in Reform UK. So actually, we have a very different proposal from renewable energy. Renewable energy is currently subsidised to the tune of about £10 billion per year. That's £10,000 million per year. That's an awful lot of money. Much cheaper than that, and actually bringing more jobs than renewable resources, are small nuclear reactors built in large cities around our country, similar to the ones that we find in our submarine fleet. These can be brought to big cities and even larger towns. They provide local jobs. They create a localised grid network, which creates for viability, protection for power cuts or any issues that might come up. And so we believe that that is actually the right way to go, and it's a better way of finding jobs in the local community. The renewable subsidies is what's adding to our debt every year. And at Reform UK, we do not believe that our children should pay for our mistakes. And we believe that we should be nuclear. Thank you.
Okay, just going back to Jill's question in terms of ensuring that Pembrokeshire got funding for green energy projects that would provide job opportunities and help combat the climate emergency. And obviously that is something which in the main is sitting within Westminster. Alistair, Liberal Democrat, what is your kind of take in terms of how we could get funding from Westminster down to Pembrokeshire to generate those green jobs and help address that climate emergency?
Yes, well, you're absolutely right that the actual energy policy for this country is determined by Westminster more than the Senate. So it answers the earlier question, but would you be involved in national things? This is one key thing. And there's no doubt that the whole floating offshore wind turbines has got massive potential for Pembrokeshire. These would be sited well out into the sea off the coast of southwest Wales and southwest England, but potentially they could provide all of the electricity for up to a third of the households in the UK. That is very exciting, and this is where Pembrokeshire can play a key role. And they've also got enormous potential for local jobs for this area, for highly skilled jobs, let's say in Pembroke Dock, in the Clevi. But if it's going to be successful, it's going to need the support from the UK government. And actually, I read a report by a House of Commons committee that Stephen Crabb actually chaired, in fact, and that certainly highlighted this potential. But if it's going to be successful, it is going to need the support from the UK government to provide this infrastructure in Pembroke Dock, to provide the national grid, to connect it all. And that really is the job of a local MP, to secure that support and to work with people of all political persuasions, to use your influence to base your case on facts, and that at the end of the day is how you'd be judged by, you know, as an MP. And as well as that, all the other areas of energy support, like adapting our houses so you have better insulation, so that you've got heat pumps, all of that is going to rely on UK government funding. And it's your job as the MP to secure that and to work with other people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair. Henry, if you were MP after next week, would you be looking perhaps, as well as the existing commitments in the manifesto, to kind of join Welsh Labour colleagues in terms of calling for the devolvement of the Crown Estate to Wales and able to support those kind of jobs here in Pembrokeshire?
So there's no formal commitment around devolving the Crown Estate. What I think is really critical around is this issue, and our future as a county around green energy, because the energy sector has been instrumental for us. There was a time when we had 4 oil refineries, and it created massive opportunities for people around the haven. And we need to do that again, but we need to do it for renewable energy. We can't have a situation where there is no industrial strategy. We can't have a situation where there's money available or there's applications made by the Port Authority for a green energy terminal in Pembroke Dock, and we lose out. We need Pembrokeshire to be at the forefront of this. And Labour has a plan, an industrial strategy called the Green Prosperity Plan, which will cut energy bills, deliver energy security, and secure good, well-paid jobs. And the key, you're right to raise the Crown Estate, because the Crown Estate, and colleagues will know this, are doing the leasing process out in the Celtic Sea. But the real challenge that we have is around local content. And that's almost a bigger prize than thinking about the proceeds going off those leases. Because if we can if we can make developers that are going to process these floating turbines offshore in the Celtic Sea, if we can make sure that they develop aspects of that process in Pembrokeshire, we can hugely rejuvenate our local economy. And as it stands, as the way it's been set up and the way that certain colleagues on the thing have simply rolled over in respect of this, we're going to lose out, whereby we have a situation where developers can process this stuff in third countries, float it in, and we get no benefit as a county. And I'm not prepared to let that happen. And I'm going to be cheerleading, if I'm elected as the representative, cheerleading from the front in respect of Labour's plan. And that will change this county fundamentally.
Okay. Thank you, Henry. Finally, Stephen Crabb, in terms of, we just heard cheerleading, what cheerleading have you done for Pembrokeshire in terms of this particular sector?
So I wrote the cross-party report on floating offshore wind, which has already been referred to, and I helped lead the cross-party Celtic Sea group in Parliament. I've spent the last 2 years meeting with pretty much every floating offshore wind developer who's expressed an interest in doing a project in the Celtic Sea. And I speak to the Crown Estate at least once a month and meet with ministers and officials in the relevant departments. And I've sat alongside Vaughan Gething and we've worked together on some of these issues. So my track record on this is, I think, fairly strong. I would just agree in principle with all of the other speakers about the scale of the opportunity. You know, we don't get very many big industrial opportunities like this coming along in Wales. That's the fact. This is a once in a 30 or 40 year opportunity where something which promises lots and lots of potentially very good jobs, if we get it right, is coming to Wales. And we've got to do everything we can to put two hands on that and seize those opportunities. And you know, I'm passionate about doing everything I can at a Westminster level to make that happen. It isn't true what Henry says that at the moment there's the developers don't have to have any content at all in the UK, and they just float this stuff from overseas, and we don't see any benefit. There is a huge amount of work that has gone on with the Crown Estate, which is the effectively the public body that owns the seabed that's going to be leasing the seabed to these companies. There's been a huge amount of work gone on to ensure that in those leasing agreements there are social value commitments to ensure that work actually happens here, but also requires the supply chain in Wales and the UK to be in a competitive position to be able to do that. And so we are still at the very early stages of this. Progress is happening. And people come up to me and say, what's all about this offshore wind stuff? When are the jobs going to be created? We are still a few years away from really seeing the first fruits of that. And there's an awful lot of work to be done in the meantime. In terms of unlocking the funding, we talked about the Crown Estate leasing. There's also contracts for difference and making sure at a UK government we get that right, because last year it wasn't. And we need to kind of set the level right to encourage the developers to actually bid in and bid for projects in the Celtic Sea. And then there's other things that we need to get right, one of which is grid connection, getting the national grid. I'm sorry, I'm being warned on time. And the other bit is really important, and it involves this place that we're in tonight. It's skills, making sure that we've got enough people skilled and ready to do the jobs that are potentially going to be created.
Thank you very much. So before we move into closing statements, are there any comments from the floor based on the environment? And Jill Simpson, do you have any comments that you would like to make as the person asking the question, or were you happy for the people behind you to ask? There we go. In the yellow.
Oh, thank you. We've heard quite a lot about wind turbines. Sometimes we don't have wind. Tides come in twice a day. So what is the feeling of the panel about tidal turbines in the sea or rivers?
Thank you for that question on tidal. I'll ask kind of just two members of the panel because we are stuck for time. So Alistair, can I come to you first on this one?
Yes, I think tidal power does have potential. Obviously, it's been looked at for Swansea Bay, hasn't it? And also for the Severn. I think when it was looked at, it was considered that it was a massive capital investment and whether it could be justified. I think that was the problem, which is why I'm talking more about floating offshore wind. But to be absolutely frank, we've got this massive climate crisis that we're all facing at the moment. We've got to move over to renewable power as quickly as possible. And a lot of people work very hard, particularly on the Severn barrage, trying to establish that. And I would like to see that. And I would like to see the capital provided for it. We'd be very supportive.
Okay, thank you, Alistair. And one more from the panel on tidal. Chris Thomas, you mentioned about community projects. Is tidal something a community could do?
Most definitely. In Anglesey and Ysmôn, there is a moralised project, pilot project being funded up there. So there are great examples, but we have seen pilots that have been not so successful. We've seen tidal turbines be lowered into the sea and have not been that effective. So I think the technology needs to develop and there should be investment in that. And once we get the Crown Estate involved, we can invest in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your participation here live in the audience. Thank you to everyone at home who's been taking part as well online and using the PWR app. If you haven't got it, now's a good opportunity to download it, and you can tune in to Pure West Radio 24 hours a day. I'll be back on air tomorrow on the breakfast show from 6 a.m. We are going to have closing statements from each of the representatives here, but I just want to give this opportunity now to express our thanks for their ability to be here this evening. Thank you very much. And also remind you that the polls open a week today, and you're allowed one cross in that box. It's first past the post, and you will need photo ID to be able to vote in this upcoming general election. You should all have had your voter card through the door telling you where your nearest voting station is, your polling station. And what we've offered you this evening is hopefully good insight into the individual who's going to represent you as a member of parliament. You don't vote for a party, you vote for the people on the stage here, and of course the statement read out from the Green Party earlier on. So bear this in mind, bear their manifestos in mind when you're applying your X next week, and to consolidate what we've talked about on the questions relating to rural communities, agriculture, social care, housing, transport and environment. And we're going to invite them now for closing statements. Iwan, who are we going to go to first?
Okay, could we start with our independent candidate, please? Could we start with Lucy? And you have 90 seconds.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to the 5 participants in the audience for the questions. Questions that are key, that are core to what I believe we need to move forward with. As Tom said, you don't vote for a party, you vote for one of us. Having that faith or trust that we would move forward as your representative. You've heard the importance of cross-party working. Pulling together is my tagline, if you like, is my motto. We have to do that. The period of politics that's dividing and decisiveness, we've got no choice but to move on from that and be a team, as Stephen has, to be fair, pointed out. And so the first thing we've got to do is to be honest in accepting that the social contract, as Stuart made reference to earlier, has been broken. And your questions have identified that between your political institutions and yourselves. You're playing the part as best as you can. You're struggling. People are struggling, as the panel has pointed out. And this is something that we have to, as a new political class moving into a new era, have to make that change. We have to repair that broken contract around social care and health, environment, housing, agriculture and transport in our community here in Mid and South Pembrokeshire. So voting for me is voting for someone who's going to pull together, using you as the team. You are my bosses, and we can fundamentally make the change that we all know needs to happen.
Thank you. Stuart Marchant, Reform UK.
I think we'd all agree that there are systematic problems in our constituency and across the UK. These systematic problems have existed for at least 20 years, and merely switching sides at every election, in my view, is not going to change anything. While Reform UK have some very drastic offerings to the UK population, our offerings are based on common sense. Our contract with the people is the only manifesto, although I'm not supposed to use that word, but it's the only manifesto that actually sets out a clear plan for each section of government department. It's a clear costed plan. Our tax reforms are going to save us a lot of money. £20,000 tax-free earnings is a lot. People on minimum age would be paying a very small amount of tax each year, an upper limit of 70,000 before you enter the 40% tax. It's a systematic revolution that's going to save money. That money can be better used, and we all agree that there's many problems in our constituency. The transport links, the farming, we need money to address that. But adding to the debts of the UK or the Welsh government is not the way to go. It's not for our children to pay. And so I think that I would beg you all to read the Reform UK contract. It's not that long, it's about 30 pages because we don't waffle, we just get to the point. So I'd please take the time to read it. Common sense policies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, final closing statement from Plaid Cymru, Chris Thomas.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Yes, it's been a great evening. Thank you, and opportunity to cover a lot of topics. But at the end of the day, Plaid Cymru, obviously, we're pushing Wales, we're pushing Pembrokeshire, but we're talking here about macro economy issues. But at the end of the day, it's about micro businesses and communities who actually make up the economy, isn't it? And, the word Cymru, Wales, Cymru means community of communities. And in Wales, we are a set of communities working to improve the outlook for our families, our friends, our communities. So Plaid Cymru is there to push that citizenship. And even this week in the news, I don't know if you saw it, but the issues with river pollution, it's citizen scientists, individual volunteers going out to actually test riverbeds, test the water, and then provide that information for macro government to do something about it. So Plaid Cymru is all about working with individuals, working with community groups to keep our shops open from closure, community purchase of pubs, and community purchase of land and housing. And we have the future in our own hands. We just need to know and be guided on how to best use our resources for the future of our communities and Cymru. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Okay, diolch, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Now coming to the closing statement for the Welsh Liberal Democrats, to Alistair Cameron, please.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. As I go around the doors, I find that many people are still very unsure as to who they should be voting for in this election. And we're putting ourselves forward as Liberal Democrats as an option, as an alternative to some of the other parties. As a party, we've gone through quite a difficult period over the last few years, but we are now rising in the polls and doing a lot better. And I stand very much behind our values as Liberal Democrats. We believe in individual freedom and that everybody should have the opportunity to have fulfilling lives. We believe in social justice, and that's so important in Pembrokeshire, where we have the 4th highest level of child poverty in Wales, which is absolutely disgraceful. We're an internationalist party, and we believe we should work with overseas countries to tackle all of our problems. And we're concerned about having a sustainable future and tackling the climate and the nature crisis. I stand before you on my local record as a councillor for Kilgetty and Begelly, and in the 2 years I've been on the council, I've really learned about Pembrokeshire and the challenges that we all face. So I'm putting myself forward to you and offering my services to you as a potential MP. Thank you very much.
I'm going to invite the closing statements from Welsh Labour, Henry Tufnell.
Thank you very much for giving up your time this evening to come here. It's been a really positive discussion, and I've really enjoyed the hustings that we've had over the course of the past couple of weeks with my fellow candidates. I think it's really important that we try and re-engage people in that political process, because after nearly 20 years of a Conservative MP in this county and nearly 14 years of Tory government in Westminster, it's time for a change. And I have the skills, energy, and ability to put Pembrokeshire at the forefront of Labour's plan for Pembrokeshire. We need honesty, integrity, accountability, and fundamentally a sense of public service back in political life. That's what I'm proud to a platform to stand on, and it's what Keir Starmer has been saying throughout this election campaign. It's time for change, and I would encourage you all to vote Labour on the 4th of July, because in this constituency, it is very much a two-horse race between Labour and the Conservatives. And if you vote for any other party on this panel, apart from the Labour Party, you'll be allowing Stephen Crabb another 5 years in office here in Pembrokeshire. And that is something that Pembrokeshire and this county cannot afford.
And lastly, the closing remarks from the Welsh Conservative, Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, and thank you for tonight's debate, which has been really positive. And I'd like to wish all of the other candidates the very best for the last 6 days of the campaign. I've spent 5 weeks talking to hundreds and hundreds of people on their doorsteps and in shops and in pubs across Pembrokeshire. I have never known, in all of the 7 elections I've worked on in Pembrokeshire, the levels of disillusion, frustration, anger at times towards not just my party at Westminster, Labour in Cardiff. That's the reality that's out there. And as we have demonstrated in the discussion that we've had tonight, the challenges facing our communities here in Pembrokeshire and our nation continue to mount. The complexity and the scale of the challenges are enormous. And I just think that at a time like this, it's never been more important to have a Member of Parliament genuinely rooted in the community, who's willing to stand up, put their head above the parapet, be critical on a fair basis, and put their needs of their county and their local residents first. And that's the basis on which I am standing again at this election. I think for us in Pembrokeshire, local identity, that sense of place and individual togetherness really matters. If it didn't, why on earth would there be a reason for Pure West Radio when Radio Pembrokeshire decided to go down the route of becoming a generic national station? We value the local in our community. And I think that's really important. And the promise that I'm making to local people at this election again is always to work hard and do my very best for them, and always to put the needs of our county first.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. Thank you to all our candidates for their closing statements. Just to reiterate in terms of the conversation which is online, it has been ongoing for the past 2 hours. One thing we will pick up, Jane Sullivan commented that it is a disappointment to see an all-male panel, and we just would kind of want to note that Hannah Anderson from the Women's Equality Party was invited but sadly could not attend and did send her apologies, as we noted at the start of the event. Just a couple of thank yous. Thank you to you for being in the audience here this evening, for taking the time to actually come and debate and listen to the conversation from the panel on those issues around rural communities, social care, housing, transport and environment. I wish we could have had more time. Our gratitude to the college for hosting us, for staying open, for keeping us in this safe place, a place of learning, a place of skill, and a place of opportunity for our county as well. Thank you to our colleagues from TCW for all the fantastic, technicals here. It is like being at BBC Question Time, and we thank you for your support in terms of making this a real hustings for Pembrokeshire. Also, a thank you to all the team at Pure West Radio who have been phenomenal in terms of their support for this event, and also to the team from Planet who continue to empower communities day in, day out, working with partners across communities. So a big thank you to all of the colleagues and the teams from Pure West and Planet.
If you've enjoyed this, Pure Politics will return on Sunday the 22nd of September, where one of these candidates could well be your next Member of Parliament. So I think we'll have to sign you up now for that show already. And also, there is a new cabinet within the council who also need a bit of a grilling after their first couple of months in post. Thank you once again. I need to fill 30 seconds of time before the jazz box comes on. So just to reiterate, and if you like your fix of jazz, it's on the last Thursday of every month. I'll be back on The Breakfast Show with Gina Jones tomorrow morning from 6 a.m. It's Pure West Radio. We are 24 hours a day for Pembrokeshire, from Pembrokeshire. And my thanks to the team for trusting our vision and making this a reality. Another string to our bow. Very grateful. Listen online on your smart speaker and on your Pure West Radio